Hi, my name is Auld. I'm the Director of Education with Illuminate Colorado, and today we're talking with Becky Tulpa about the Toxicology Guide and how that can be used with child welfare. And so, Becky, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Becky Tulpa, and I am a supervisor of child protection in Larimer County, Colorado.
Awesome, thank you. So Becky was instrumental in helping us to bring the Tox Guide together, and I'm just curious about your experience working on the Toxicology Guide.
It was a great experience, of course. It was super exciting to have the opportunity to work with, of course, you, Anne, and Jade Woodard, and also Dr. Wong. It gave me the opportunity to think through all of the questions that I might have as a child welfare supervisor and also as a child protection caseworker, kind of trying to wear both hats at the same time. And ask those questions to Dr. Wong, so then we could have it all in one place as a resource. So oftentimes, you know, when we're working with clients and families and we're thinking through things in red teams, or, you know, when we're trying to write DNN letters, it's great to have that research backing to be able to use when we need it. And this gave us all of that in one location, in one handy dandy location that I could access while I'm in the field, or you know, back in my office if I want to see it in print.
Yeah, I think that's one of the unique pieces to the Tox Guide, is that those pull-out sections around, like, how does this apply to your work? What would this look like in your work? So it goes a little bit deeper than just being a, hey, what is a substance? What does someone look like on a substance? It's how does this apply to your work? And you certainly spent a lot of time working with us, kind of thinking through, like, what would a child welfare caseworker need to know around this, how this might be impacting their work. And one of the things that I was super curious about was how you use it in supervision. And can you tell me a little bit about how it is that you use the guide while in supervision, talking with those workers up in Larimer County?
Sure. So I think the Tox Guide is really broken out well by substance. So we get reports, child protection reports all the time about a family with concerns they're using a specific substance, right? So when a caseworker comes into supervision, it's a good opportunity for me to sit down with that caseworker and look at the guide and say, okay, so here are some of the things that we know. Here's how they use it. Here are some of the signs and symptoms that may come along with use of cocaine. And then at the bottom, where that little light bulb is, we're seeing something that's the guide's critical thinking section. And it talks about bottle jamming, you know, like when folks are coming down off cocaine, they can be frustrated and upset. And so that can cause some of those parenting of toddler moments to be a little trickier, right? Parenting toddlers, feeding babies can be hard, whether you're coming down from a substance or you're just a parent. But it increases some of that concern. So when looking at this, you may or may not be working with a toddler. Seeing this critical thinking guide piece of it, what if they have a teenager? What are some things you want to think about when you go out there? What are some of the worries you may have around how this may affect their parenting of a teenager? And it gives me, you know, a good jumping off point with a caseworker to help them critically think through what's next, right? We want to empower people to come up with creative, you know, questions and think through every scenario when they're out in the field and be able to think on their feet. That's a really difficult thing to do for all of us. Whether you and I are having a conversation or a caseworker is having a conversation in the field with a family, we need to be able to think on our feet. So when you have a guide like this, it gives you some base points to think about. Oh yeah, okay, bottle jamming might be something I would be worried about. Well, with a teenager, I also might be worried about supervision. If parents are high or they're coming down, what does that mean for supervision of this teenager? Who's getting them to school? Or maybe making sure they're online in these crazy times we're in right now. But I think it gives us, you know, just a good jumping off point. So that can be done for any substance that's in the guide. The other thing I think that it can do is to help us think through, for example, marijuana, right? Marijuana, alcohol, those substances are legal. And I think it's one of the common questions that we're asked as casework staff. It's legal, so what? You know, I'm allowed to drink. I'm allowed to use marijuana. Yep, that's true. And It also depends on how it affects your parenting. So when you look at the guide, it's the same thing. There are those little light bulb sections that talk about, here are some of the signs and symptoms, here are some things to think about. And it gives me as a supervisor a good jumping off point in supervision to talk about, okay, what are your thoughts around what the worries are here? Why would it be a concern if it's legal? And in fact, I think marijuana, alcohol, your cell phone, I don't, sugar, it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. The guide helps us think about that. I think way back when, I might date myself right now, but remember when bath salts were first coming out and that person was driving that crazy armored vehicle through Winter Park, maybe was it? I can't remember.
Yep.
We didn't really know what bath salts were back then.
Nope.
If we were to have had the guide, we might have been able to look at it and think about, okay, yep, I know this behavior isn't normal, but all those drug screens are coming back negative. So then what? There's actually like a little piece in the back that talks about then what? So if the test is negative, is it really negative? I don't know, but we need to be looking at signs and symptoms. And the guide has so many great critical thinking tips that I think just give us a good jumping off point to move forward with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to talk about the now what. So someone comes back with a positive test, comes back with a negative test, now what? Now, what does that tell us about the safety in that home? And so those are great points. I love it when we talk about using those critical thinking skills and how the guide can support those as another tool in the tool belt. I think one of the things that we were most proud of around the guide was the fact that it told you things that you did need to know, but it also told you things that maybe you think you know, but maybe aren't going to sit in the exact way that you were hoping so, or that it meant something slightly different than what you were thinking, or that it just opened up those possibilities to be able to do a deeper dive around what does this mean? What could this mean? Is this, if I were to do testing, why? What would be the reason behind that? What is it that I'm looking for in the end around that? And also being able to search the guide in a couple of different ways. So depending on where you were coming into a case or what the question was, the guide is both online and you can also print it out in PDF form, but it gives you a couple of different ways to be able to retrieve information, really depending on what you need. And then you can also then circle back in a couple of different places, depending again on what your needs were. So giving you a lot of different options for how it is that you could use it and when you would use it. But with that that underlining piece there around what are the impacts to child welfare? What are the impacts to families? How do we think about families and individuals in light of all of this information that is sometimes feels a little bit more concrete than maybe it is, and understanding that individuals are going to look different, and how do we think about that in light of testing or just substance use in general, understanding that there is so many individual aspects that will come into that. And so super grateful for the work that you did on that, helping us to bring that child welfare lens to, I really feel like giving some life to a resource that was a little bit more straightforward, and here's what cocaine is, and here's, you know, what it looks like when somebody may be on cocaine, but bringing in that child welfare lens of, okay, what does that actually mean to the work that you're doing?
I think it's also helpful for planning, right? In thinking about how do we plan appropriately for families? How do we help them come up with a plan that's going to work for them and keep their kiddos safe? The guide helps us think about what are some of the signs and symptoms, and then in supervision, it gives us a chance to talk through how do we plan for that? What are some things that we can think about for the future? What do we look for? How do we help families notice that in other family members and other friends, things like that.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you would like people to know about the Tox Guide?
I'm thinking about, I guess my hope with the Tox Guide is that it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to, or that let me try that again. My hope for folks when they're taking a look at the Tox Guide is that they're going to have the opportunity to think through a few things. One of those things is obviously, how to engage families better, because I think knowledge is power. So thinking about all the things that we know from this Tox guide, it gives us the education to then go out and have a great conversation with a family member, and be transparent about our worries and hear what they have to say in return. I think the other thing that the Tox guide could do for us is help us have better conversations with support folks. So I actually think that it's a great opportunity for us to sit down with a support person and say, here are some of the signs and symptoms for you to look for. You know, what do you see? What do you think about this? And then in the future, in planning, it's another opportunity for them to go back and look at it. I think it could be used for parents of teenagers too. I am a parent of a teenager, and I think it's a good opportunity for me even to think about, you know, what are some of the signs and symptoms? What are some of the things I want to notice, you know, so that I can be a better parent to my child. That's another piece of it. Or any parent could be a better parent to their child. We can make copies of pages certainly and hand it out to a family to have and to take a look at themselves. So knowledge is power, right? I mean, I think having this at our fingertips it's a great resource. It can be used in so many different realms, and I am super appreciative actually to have it and to be able just to hand it out to caseworkers to keep and use as they need, and also to be able to access while they're in the field. Yeah. If I were to search marijuana, the amount of stuff that comes up on marijuana is awesome.
And another place to be able to use the Tox guide are those conversations that caseworkers might have with other professionals. And so ensuring that everyone's having the same conversation, using the same language. Maybe it could be something that's back up around why a plan was made and how it is that those other professionals could support it. And so definitely something to be used across the board with folks that they're working with folks within their own teams, and certainly with the families that they are serving.
And doctors too. I mean, I think about when we're having conversations with doctors, this gives me the language that I never knew, like nystagmus. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but when I hear it, then I can go back, because there's actually the glossary in the back that gives the information on what these things mean. So I can just write it down and go to my glossary and figure it out. That's another piece that's really helpful.
You know, that's a really good point, because oftentimes when we were putting all of this together, we kind of laughed about all those doctor terms, but oftentimes that's what comes back on the paperwork from a doctor, is all of these words that we look at and go, I don't even know what that even begins to mean. So yeah, so another reference to be able to break down some of those information that we're getting from other professionals to ensure that we're all using the same language or understanding where a case is based on people coming at it from different levels. So yeah.
And then a vehicle to have that conversation with the doctor also about, what does this mean for parenting? What are some things that I should be looking for? How might this affect their caregiving of that child? That's another piece that's really important to us, because whether someone's using or not, we need to be able to trust but verify some of those things and figure out, what's underneath it. What does the behavior look like? How is this affecting the kids that they're parenting? It may not be, right? I mean, we need to be thinking about all those things. It could be a mental health issue. It could be a variety of things, but it gives us a vehicle to have that conversation too.
Awesome. Well, Becky, thank you so much.
Yes, it was great to see you.